One continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Now, former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has been sentenced to 5 years in jail for criminal conspiracy over attempts to raise campaign funds from Libya. This historic ruling, handed down on Thursday, marks a spectacular downfall for the conservative leader who served as president of France between 2007 and 2012. Sarkozy becomes the first modern French head of state to face actual prison time. The Paris court found that Sarkozy is guilty of secretly seeking millions in campaign financing from the regime of late Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. To speak a little bit more about this, we speak to Naeem Jenaah, senior researcher at the Maphungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. Jenaah.
Thank you, Tsepiso.
So just based on what I said, this is the first head of state from France who actually faces criminal, or rather prison time. But just looking at the charges that he's been found guilty of and those that have been acquitted, overall, how would you say is this moment significant in the sense that a French leader has been held accountable for actions that he's taken in collusion with or that could undermine Africa's sovereignty?
Well, I don't know about the undermining of Africa's sovereignty, except that this whole story of his possibly being given campaign funding by Gaddafi is really related to the French actions in 2011, when just before the invasion of NATO of Libya. So, as you said, the court found that he and his cronies, his aides, had attempted to solicit funding from Gaddafi for his 2007 election campaign. That was what got him sentenced to 5 years in prison. The court found that there wasn't sufficient evidence to prove whether he actually did receive the funds or not. So the 5 years is for the fact that he solicited that funding. Now, there's two scenarios here. One is that he either received it or he didn't. According to many Libyans, he did receive it. And so if we go by that story, he received the funding, and then in 2011, as the uprisings were taking place across North Africa, the story goes, Gaddafi basically kind of blackmailed him and told him that he was going to expose his receiving funding from Libya. As a result of that, France got involved with or instigated the rebellion in the east. You remember when the rebellion began in the east of Libya. The other version is, let's assume that he didn't receive the funding. He didn't receive the funding that he tried for, but it was already getting out that he had solicited the funding, and he needed of the main witness to this whole conspiracy, which was Gaddafi and those around him, and so saw this opportunity in 2011. So this kind of thing of how,
Yes, you can finish that train of thought.
No, what I was saying is that this kind of thing of how Europeans get involved in bribery and corrupt practices with Africans, and then go out of the way, in fact, to undermine an African state, an African nation, as a result of their personal issues.
And that last bit, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's what I meant about undermining African sovereignty, or an African country's sovereignty, because part of what is out there is the allegation that it was a quid pro quo deal, that Nicolas Sarkozy would have promised leniency for Gaddafi's brother-in-law, Abdallah Senussi, who was convicted in France. And that also goes to the issue of the rule of law, against the accusations, constant accusations of African countries not adhering to the rule of law because of corruption.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Gaddafi, there were more than one of these kinds of deals that were made. Remember the Pan Am bombing the aircraft as well. I mean, it's widely believed that the guy that was finally handed over, the Libyan intelligence agent, was handed over and went to prison as a result, that he actually wasn't the one responsible. But a deal needed to be made in order for sanctions to be lifted off Libya, and so it was. But that I think Libya is, in a sense, in terms of your question, a bit of a special case, partly because it was a state that was very rich and was able to throw money around in that kind of way. But when you look at other states on the continent, they might not be rich in terms of liquid finance, but rich in terms of resources. And the manner in which money from Europe is thrown around in order to buy the rights for these resources, leading in some cases to actual wars and thousands of people being killed. We're seeing this in Central Africa taking place, mining rights in DRC and other places, with Israelis and others being involved. So Africa really has for too long been this kind of a playground. And there's also Tsipi, so we must say that there's a bit of a kind of a racist element here. The assumption by Europeans that Africans are easily bribable. And so, we know of stories of big corporations in Europe that actually have line items in their books for bribing government officials and others in African countries.
And again, I'm glad that you raised that, because it does raise, in general, the nature of the relationship with a big European power which enjoys veto powers at the UN General Assembly, like France, which is often painted as a beacon of hope when it comes to democracy, against I go back to the issue with African partners. So Sarkozy being held accountable in this manner, what message does it send in whether or not Europe is finally opening its eyes to the kind of shenanigans that happened in backroom dealings, and who actually should take accountability? Because, as former President Thabo Mbeki has often pointed out, there is the corruptor and the corruptee, and it's often put on Africa as being the one that's corrupt, and that's where it ends, that they're the corruptor and corruptee.
So if we look at the news coverage of the Sarkozy story, the story isn't so much about Libya. It's not so much about Africa. And Libya features as, in a sense, a necessary footnote in the story. But he's going to prison because he violated French laws and undermined French electoral processes. It's got nothing to do with what he did with African states. The fact that he might have actually launched a war that resulted in the loss of tens of thousands of lives. All of those things is irrelevant, and this is what the point that you're making, Tsipi, so that when we talk about the rule of law for European or global North states, I should say, the rule of law means how do they make sure that their own people among themselves behave themselves. They can misbehave towards people of the global South, particularly Africans. And, I often use this example that at the beginning of the 20th century, when Europeans were making a big thing about the rules of war, about having laws how to regulate wars between themselves, Germany committed 2 genocides in Namibia at that time, because these Africans are really not on the same level. The rule of law, international law, etc., is designed to apply among Europeans. Not the others. And so that's why I say that in the Sarkozy story, Libya is just a necessary footnote. The people that he tried to entice were Libyans, and that's where that story ends. But the problem with Sarkozy is that he undermined electoral laws. That's why he's going to prison.
So he's been acquitted of Sarkozy of passive corruption, embezzlement of Libyan public funds, and illegal election campaign financing. financing, to your point, because the manner in which this is framed is that his actions are alleged to have helped rehabilitate Libya's international standing. And yet when you look at the sentence, obviously he's been not given a get out of jail free card, but the sentence itself has been deferred, so to speak, that he's not going to jail right away, but in a month's time he's got to report to jail, even though he can appeal the sentencing.
Yes, this is one of the unprecedented things about this, is that he's not going to be allowed to be out of prison while his appeal is in process. He has to sit in jail while the appeal takes place. And I think that part of it is that Sarkozy is not a first-time convictee. Is that a word? In 2021, he was convicted on a number of charges relating to corruption, etc. He wasn't sent to prison, but he was under a kind of house arrest, had to wear a bracelet on his ankle bracelet, etc., and only had it removed because he turned 70. And in France, when you turn 70, there's some leniency. So he's a serial violator, and I think that that's the reason why now they're not letting him be out while he's appealing the case.
But that's, interestingly enough, he apparently can request conditional release because of his age. And as you mentioned, this is part of Sarkozy's mounting legal troubles. He's already been convicted on 2 other cases. The Big Million affair of his 2012 presidential campaign, and the Bismuth case involving corruption and influence peddling. Is he an anomaly in terms of French politics or even European politics? And I'll bring it back to Africa, how they deal with African countries.
We don't really know whether he's an anomaly. I mean, all the news stories are saying this is unprecedented, the first time a president's going to go to prison, which is true. But, we consider that Jacques Chirac, another French president, was also convicted on similar kind of charges, electoral fraud, kind of.
And unfortunately, it seems that line didn't hold out for us. So are you with us, Naeem? All right, it seems like we've lost that line to Naeem Jenaah, senior researcher at the Maphungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, just speaking to us about, as he says, an unprecedented event. It was breaking news that former French President Nicolas Sarkozy is to face 5 years in jail. The conviction has to do with allegations against him because of criminal conspiracy. That's what he's been found guilty of in relation to Libyan campaign funds related to former President Muammar Gaddafi. And we're just speaking about the impact on this and what it really says about France, Libya, and French-African relations, and including the global south and global north. That brings the time to 23 minutes to 10.